I hope everyone indeed had a joy-filled Christmas, and family and good friends and great food came along your way. And I just want us not to rush through the Christmas. Rather, why don't we let Christmas linger a bit longer here among us? Valentine's Day will come soon enough. On Christmas Eve, Karen invited us and then challenged us to shine light. To shine the light of hope and joy, because she said the world is afraid and filled with sorrow and grief. She asked us to shine the light of peace and love because the world is filled with war, destruction, and death. Because the world seems so dark these days, because there is such a climate of fear and folly, we are people who are invited to shine light. Darkness cannot overcome the light. Now, these days, the phrase light shining in the darkness sounds more like a promo trailer for the new Star Wars flick, doesn't it? Shining light in the darkness. Everybody will smile or it'll go on and on and on. Shining light in the darkness. It's ours. It's not a movie. And we need to own that as people of light and be bold, because we are indeed a community who shine light, followers of Christ, people of good news. We can't hide it. We can try to avoid it. We can refuse it. We can run away from it. But the reality is that as people of good news, we shine light. It's how we live our lives. And that's a message worth keeping close to us each and every day. And that's why we should let this Christmas linger within us, because we are people of light, people of good news. Today's passage concludes really the story of Jesus' birth with the shepherds' response to their vision that night, and then their discovery of the promised child. And immediately the story shifts into framing the infancy narrative, which clearly indicates traditional Jewish piety. Mary and Joseph were faithfully obedient to their faith. And the focus this morning is on obedience. And I want us to look at those verses 20 and 22. And within these verses, we can see four actions that I want you to notice. First, circumcision. The naming of Jesus is second. The third is Mary presenting herself for purification. And the fourth is the presentation of Jesus in the temple. Mary and Joseph were good Jews doing what good Jews had done since the time of Abraham, being obedient. Now, the word obey in its various forms occurs about 160 times in the Bible. Additionally, there are hundreds of references to God's laws and commands and orders and decisions and regulations, all of which call for obedience in some form or another. So there is little doubt that God highly values obedience as an indispensable ingredient for living a faithful life. For obedience opens the door to companionship with God's Spirit. 8 days had passed, and Mary and Joseph brought Jesus to be circumcised. Mary and Joseph named their child Jesus. Mary presented herself for purification, and then Mary and Joseph presented Jesus to the Lord. These four obedient acts are in response to their rituals of faith. So we have this difficulty with rituals these days because they become passé for us. But for the Jews, The teaching of the Jewish laws taught that God was to be honored in the rising up and in the laying down, in the going out and the coming forth, in how one dresses and how one eats. For Mary and Joseph, obedience was the act of marking and recognizing the sacredness of life and the presence of God in the everyday. So perhaps we too should pay a bit more attention to celebrating the presence of God in the ordinary, learning to greet the morning with gratitude, to celebrate the goodness of family and friends and food, to recognize the mystery in the beauty of our lives, to mark the rituals of a birthday. So I think Mary and Joseph teach us about the significance of being obedient. I heard a story about a father who called his small children together, and as they sat together in a circle on the floor, the dad placed a toy in the middle. And he explained to them that he had won this toy as a door prize, and he wanted to give it to one of them, but he had 5 kids. So he asked them, who is the most obedient? And all their eyes looked at him. And sensing that they didn't really understand, he asked, okay, who obeys mommy and does everything she says? So the littlest one goes to the middle of the circle, picks up the toy, and hands it to the father and said, Dad, you win. It's cute, and there's some truth in it, at least for me. The definition of obedience is complying with or submissive to authority. And psychologically, obedience is a form of social influence that involves performing an action under the orders of an authoritarian figure. It differs from compliance, which involves changing your behavior at the request of another person, or conformity, which involves altering your behavior in order to get along with the rest of the group. Obedience involves altering your behavior because a figure of authority has told you so. Now, in a lot of ways, obedience is necessary in all spheres of life. American writer Anatole Boyard writes this: there was a time when we expected nothing of our children but obedience, as opposed to the present when we expect everything of them but obedience. But obedience is foundational in our society. And without it, there would be much more serious and intense problems if you think about it. We are a society based on law, society based on obeying the law. And in a very simplistic way, there's a one-way street. It has a big sign on it. You know that other people see it because they're going down the one-way street pointed in the right direction. You see it, and you decide to follow the direction. Why? There was no police officer there because it prevents you from a head-on collision. So obedience is important, and there would be chaos, anarchy without obedience. Stability, productivity, the well-being would be at severe risk. There's a need for obedience in the workplace. Children are to be obedient to their parents. Most children do. Obedience is required in our relationships. And even though we don't talk about the importance of obedience, it plays a significant role in our lives. And we know there's also a dark side of obedience that we cannot dismiss. It's when obedience becomes destructive, causing physical or emotional or physical, mental anguish to oneself or others. It's that kind of blind obedience following orders or directives given by the authority that results in harm. So blind obedience, we get it. It's on to the degree. Blind obedience loses your individuality and your ability to make choices. It's not a good trait. We know that, but it needs to be stated. But our focus is not on the text about being disobedient. It's really about Mary and Joseph being obedient to their faith. They went and brought Jesus to be circumcised. They named him Jesus. She went and presented herself for purification, and then they, together, Mary and Joseph, presented Jesus to the Lord. So we gather around this text the Sunday after Christmas because it teaches something about how we can live more faithful lives. It teaches us about obedience. And obedience is not an archaic term. It has no place in our inn anymore. It doesn't refer to finding the best school for your not so well-behaved rescue dog. It's not a military term. Rather, I'll suggest that being obedient enables us to see more clearly, to feel deeply, to know personally, and to understand what real and authentic living is and means as we share our lives together. Now, I'm betting that there is a distinctive difference in how Karen is presenting this sermon over at the informal worship gathering. I'm pretty sure that she is contrasting disobedient behavior, mine, with obedient behavior, hers. I'm pretty sure she's using me as an example, literally, my behavior growing up compared to hers. But I'm confident that she's also misleading the folks in that service. She's saying that she was the more obedient one. She was the one that always did the right things, always listened to her parents, ate all her lima beans, completed all her homework early, helped her mother with the ironing with total submission and great joy. But we all know that is not true. Because if you looked up the word obedient in your dictionary, the word originally translated obedient is barus. Barus. My parents named me appropriately, don't you think? Barus, the obedient son. Barus. Okay, that's not true. But what is true, and you may be as surprised as I was to find out that the word obedience in the Greek, hypokoi, is a word made up of two root words: to hear beneath. In Latin, it means to pay attention, to give ear. That is sweet. Obedience, it doesn't mean get in line, do what I tell you, or it means give ear, to pay attention. So this whole thing in obedience puts this interesting twist for me, perhaps even a deeper meaning on what it means to be obedient. Because it seems a whole lot more active, a whole lot more personal than I ever thought. It's more than just doing what I've been told. It means more than doing what I'm supposed to do. Seems like it means that I need to give ear to pay attention to, and to recognize the sacredness of life and the presence of God in the everyday. Obedient, being obedient, paying attention, giving ear means that I too can honor God's presence in the ordinary. I too can greet every day with gratitude and celebrate the goodness of life, the goodness of friends and family, and recognize mystery. You know, I never even thought that obedience was a good thing. But how sweet is it for me to be able to give ear to the voice, to give ear to you, to give ear to my wife and family, to give ear to the God of my life. So that's my goal. That's my goal this year. You can hold me accountable to become more obedient. Obedient as Scripture defines it. And as people of faith live it. So my goal is to listen to you better. To be more obedient to you. And that's my invitation to you. Can we, will we, become more obedient to the one we trust most? To the one who lives in us? To the one who always loves us? Thanks be to God.